Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
So without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker, Dr. Lee Dugatkin.
All right. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. And for those of you who are returning, I'm actually beginning to recognize faces, which I really like. And if you're new, welcome on board. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the evolution of social behavior. There are, in fact, any number of different aspects of social behavior that we could spend an entire evening on. Tonight, I want to focus on what's known as altruistic behavior. And this has special resonance to me because my own dissertation in the late 19... Want me to say it again? No. No, it's okay. So in the late 1980s, my own PhD work was on the evolution of altruism, and then more recently, I've really become interested in this topic as historian of science. And this is a topic that has been discussed by evolutionary biologists, as we'll see, ever since Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. So just to put us all on the same page to begin with, so we can kind of step back and see how these ideas developed and what people are doing today, I'm going to start with a definition. And this is a definition that you will see in Evolution and Animal Behavior. It's an operational definition, meaning that we can go out and measure things using this definition. And altruism is simply defined as any behavior that's costly to the individual who does it and benefits others. Within evolution and behavior, that's the definition you will typically see. And as we go along, we'll begin to understand that the simplicity here of how we're defining this becomes a real powerful tool. And so before we get into how evolutionary biologists think altruism evolved, first, let's think about this definition just a little bit more. So anything that's costly to self and beneficial to other. Now, if you think back to the way we've been discussing natural selection, traits are favored if they benefit the individual who possesses them. Those individuals are able to out-reproduce others, and whatever characteristics they have increased over time. This altruistic behavior is exactly the opposite. It's something that individual does that's costly to itself, but benefits others. And so this was a real riddle in evolutionary biology for a long time. How could this sort of thing evolve? To start, I'm going to show you a few videos of altruistic behavior. Okay? And they're all going to center on costly to self and beneficial to others. So let's see. Okay, you're not hearing that, darn. I don't know why the sound is not coming through here. I had a feeling. Let me see. No. Maybe we can fix it, but I'll talk. If we can't, it's no problem. I'll be able to discuss things. So what you're looking at right here is a Belding's ground squirrel. And people who study animal behavior have been studying Belding's ground squirrels for a very long time. And you can find them out west. And one of the things that Belding's ground squirrels do is they give alarm calls. Let me see if I can get the sound. Let me see if I can get this one more time to come up so that we can see if, oh, hang on. Okay, that is a Belding's ground squirrel giving an alarm call. And so what's happened is either a mammalian predator or an avian predator has been spotted by one of the squirrels. That squirrel stands up on its hind legs and gives off this piercing alarm call. All the other squirrels run for safety. And typically in Belding's ground squirrels, that means you're going down into underground holes that you've built. After it gives the alarm call, this alarm caller will also head for safety. But think about what's going on here. Standing up like that and screaming at the top of your lungs is surely going to make you the most obvious target to any predator around. So by doing that, you're undertaking a behavior that's costly to self, but benefits everybody else who runs away. They get away faster. You give the call, it's not until after you're done and everybody else has already started running that you run. And alarm calls are seen in all sorts of different species. Now, the second example I'm going to give you.
Is he like the head squirrel?
No. We're going to actually get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Okay. So the second example I'm going to discuss here might not be kind of as intuitive as seeing a mammal displaying altruistic behavior. But remember, for altruism to occur under our definition, you don't need to have a mammalian brain. You don't need to even have a brain at all. All you need to do is undertake a behavior that's costly to self and beneficial to other. And so one of the quintessential experimental systems where people have looked at altruism is slime mold. So these are individual slime mold that have been fluoresced so you can see them, and they're very, very, very tiny. You can see the scale. This is very, very, very tiny. And usually what they do is they kind of muck around in the soil looking for things to eat. And if there isn't a lot of food around, what happens is many, many, many slime mold cells come together and move around in what's been called the slug stage of development. Now, this is not a real slug. This is just 10,000 slime mold cells, but it looks like a slug, and so that's why it's called the slug cell. This thing moves around as if it was a normal multicellular creature, but in fact, all it is a bunch of these cells that just a moment ago were living independently. Now they've come together and they move around. They look for food together. This slug-like thing senses gradients in the environment of different chemicals that will help all the cells in here move towards food. And in a sense, coming together like that is sort of altruistic. But the real altruism in slime mold occurs next. So at some point, when this slug gets large enough, when it has enough of the slime mold cells in it, reproduction occurs in the slime mold. And the way that it happens is that they form what are known as fruiting bodies. Okay? And what a fruiting body is it's made up of this stalk, and at the top of the stalk is a capsule. And inside the capsule are spores. It's the next generation of slime mold. Now think about the scale we're talking about here. This too is very, very tiny. And a raindrop or a tiny microinvertebrate bumping into this will cause the capsule at the top to burst, and then the spores will spread. Now, from a slime mold perspective, given that that's the way you spread your spores, what you want is to have that capsule as high up above the ground as you can, because that'll allow for maximal dispersal. That's where the stalk becomes really important. We saw it growing up. Now, every single cell in the stalk is a slime mold cell. Those cells never reproduce. All they do is create a scaffold so that other cells, the spores here, can disperse, and we get our next generation of slime mold. The cells in the stalk are classic altruists. They do something that's costly to self. They never reproduce, and they benefit others. The others are the cells sitting in that spore, the next generation of slime mold. One last example of altruism, and then we'll start talking about, so how does this unexpected sort of behavior evolve. And this last example is an example of altruism in humans. And we can all think of many, many kinds of altruistic behavior that we either know of or are involved in ourselves. The most kind of classic ones that you will see, for example, reported on the news might be something like somebody jumping into a subway tunnel to save a kid or somebody who fell in there that they don't know and risk themselves getting hit by the subway in order to bring them up. But it doesn't have to be that dramatic. Altruism occurs in lots and lots of different ways. We give money to various different charities. We are altruistic towards our friends all the time. The example of altruism I'm going to show you I chose because it is altruism in very, very young children. And I'm going to set the stage for you, and then what's going to happen is I'm going to let you watch the video of the experiment. So what I'm going to show you is an experiment that was done at one of the Max Planck Institutes in Germany. And what the researcher did was he recruited in subjects who were, I'm guessing, about 2 years old by having their parents take them in, and they would be told that their child is going to be involved in an interesting experiment. We're trying to get some data. It's not really, dangerous in any way. You can be there with them. If you're interested, come on in. And so people would bring their little kid in to be part of this experiment. And so what you're going to see as this video begins to run is in the corner up on the top is going to be a mother with her little kid. The little kid is the subject, the one that we're getting data on. And the investigator who's doing the experiment is going to walk in. So let's watch what happens. The kid's never seen this guy before. All right, so you can think about this from different perspectives. Oh, let me just stop it here, and we'll that's just another version of this, another time it's done. So it was done many, many times, and that's typically what you found. So think about it from the perspective of a little kid. He doesn't know what's going to happen, and he's standing in the corner in safety with his mother. And this giant, who could clearly eat, from the little kid's perspective, this is someone who could eat them if they so desired, right? The giant, for some strange reason, has trouble with this task of opening up these doors, right? And what does the little kid do? He goes over from the safety of his mother, he walks over, he opens it up, and he looks up at the guy, and you can see basically what he's saying is, I don't understand why you couldn't do this, but I'm going to help you, okay? Right? Now, he didn't have to do that. And this is altruistic behavior. Costly to self. There is some risk from the perspective of this little kid. Beneficial to other. Now, you really have to be careful when you do these experiments in humans, right? Because oftentimes you're convinced something is happening when there are alternative explanations that are much simpler that also might shed light on what's going on. So for example, like in this case, it sure looks like that kid is trying to help him, right? But maybe all that was going on was the kid was kind of drawn to the fact that there was a lot of action and noise around those doors. And maybe there was something interesting in there for him. So they ran all kinds of control experiments. And one of the controls would be something like they would have a recording of various sounds coming from inside that cabinet to create the kind of interest that maybe is drawing the kid over. But when that happens, they don't respond this way. And there are other kinds of things you can do to rule out other explanations. And it really does look like in this experiment, the little kids were being altruistic. So this is a tendency that we see in our own species at a very, very young age. Okay, so squirrels and slime mold and humans. And now the question is, still, this is problematic. It's costly yourself, beneficial to other. How does natural selection ever favor something like that? This was something that Darwin worried about a lot in The Origin of Species. So when he published The Origin of Species, he did something that I would say, unfortunately, authors today just aren't given the liberty to do, which is he spent an awful lot of time talking about the problems he had with his own theory. And one of the problems that he had centered around altruism. And in particular, it centered around the kind of hyper-altruistic behavior you see in things like honeybees. Everybody knows that if you get too close to a hive, the workers, who, by the way, are always female, will come out of the hive to defend the hive. When they defend the hive, that might mean stinging you. So they're protecting individuals in the hive, and they may end up stinging you. If they sting you, it is the ultimate act of altruism. Because the way the stinger is designed is that when they sting you and then pull back, it's ripped from their body and they die. But it keeps pumping stuff into you to annoy the hell out of you and keep you away from there. So it's classic altruism, hyper-altruism. And Darwin was worried about this. Of course, Darwin was a great naturalist. He knew about this. Everybody knows about this sort of thing. How on earth could he explain this? And in fact, just a sort of kind of little sociological side note is that it wasn't only that everybody knew about honeybees and other insects doing this sort of thing. It was that at the time, there was sort of this craze over honeybees in Victorian England because people had first discovered what's known as royal jelly. It's something that the queen produces that stops all the others from, where she's trying to stop everybody else from reproducing, just her. So there was this deep interest in honeybees. And when Darwin writes about this, he writes about this altruism in really strong language. So he says this kind of altruistic behavior is one special difficulty which at first appeared to me to be insuperable and fatal to the whole theory. So you can kind of think about this as Darwin's basically saying his entire set of ideas are sort of sitting on the wings of these honeybees, and he's got to figure out how altruism can evolve. And Darwin comes up with an explanation. And the explanation involves understanding something about honeybee hives. So hives can have, depending on, well, honeybee hives, but also other beehives, they can have anywhere from a couple of dozen to hundreds, sometimes depending on other bee species, thousands of individuals. The individuals at the hive are largely all genetic relatives. Now, in Darwin's time, he didn't know about the concept of a gene, but he did know, like any good naturalist, that offspring resemble their parents. Now we know it's because they inherit genes from their parents. Darwin didn't know about this entity called the gene, but he knew something was being passed down from parents to offspring. And what he then reasoned out was this: one way you can get altruism to evolve is because it benefits genetic relatives. The reason that altruism evolves here is, and I'm going to talk in the language of genes now, even though, again, I want to be clear, Darwin didn't know about genes, but he knew about what essentially was the equivalent of it. And what he argued was, if this worker here stings somebody and dies and protects hundreds of her genetic relatives in the nest, then any copies of genes that she possesses are lost. But the copies of her genes in her genetic relatives are saved. And by definition, genetic relatives share genes. So you might save 500 copies of the genes you possess, even though you die doing that. in a kind of cost-benefit spreadsheet, altruism can evolve by helping your genetic relatives because by definition, they're likely to contain the same genes you have. Just if you're interested, Darwin's term for what he thought was being passed down were gemules. So he basically made the entire argument I just said using a term called gemules, which is very hard to find today in the literature, but that's the term he used. All right, so people were interested in this after Darwin discussed it, but in fact, there was a fairly long hiatus before evolutionary biologists returned to this question of the evolution of altruism and try to be a bit more formal about developing a theory for how altruism evolves. In this case, via genetic relatedness. We're going to talk about a couple of other ways later. But right now we're focusing on altruism and kinship. So to get to the more modern era, we have to fast forward about hundreds of years or so after Darwin and turn to this fellow, W.D. Hamilton, probably the most famous evolutionary biologist of the 20th century, who tackled the question of altruism in his dissertation, and then forever after that. Just to give you a sense of who this guy is, here's a quote from his autobiography. Believing in the explanatory power of evolution by natural selection is like a migraine. As the migraine sufferer is suspected of malingering, so the evolutionist is always suspected of covert agendas, unconnected with the reality or the search for the truth. Whatever the nature of this ailment, the ailment being understanding how powerful natural selection is, I certainly caught it or inherited it early compared to most, and it burned me badly. Hamilton's ideas we're going to talk about on altruism are perhaps the most well-cited papers in the field of evolution and behavior. He did many, many other things. We're going to focus just on this. So about 20 years ago, I wrote a book all about the evolution of altruism. I put a copy there if you want to see it. It's on the table. And one of the things that I got a chance to do was go visit where W.D. Hamilton grew up. So by this time, he had died, a fairly early death and a very, very sad story. But I got a chance to talk with his sister, and I was in the house that he grew up in. And his sister told me that, Darwin's down house was actually just a few miles away. And when they were kids, their mother would take them over there all the time and talk to them about Darwin. She claims, and I believe her, that their mother read them The Origin of Species as a bedtime story. So when Bill Hamilton, so it's William Hamilton, when he became of age to go to university, he went to Cambridge. And when he was at Cambridge, he took a major in zoology because even then, going in, he was interested in this question of the evolution of altruism. And in England, a minor is called a first, or yeah, I think that's right. But it's the equivalent of what we call a minor. He needed to have a minor, so he did a minor in anthropology. And his reason for doing that was, well, if he's over in zoology, he can study the evolution of altruism the way that an evolutionary biologist and an animal behaviorist would. But he also was interested in altruism in humans, and he thought, well, I can get a minor in anthropology. When he did that, he almost dropped out and gave up on academics. And the reason was this. He became very disillusioned. When he went over to the anthropology department and told them that his major was in genetics and behavior and that he was studying altruism, they essentially accused him of being what's known as a eugenicist, a fascist who thought everything was being driven by genes and nothing was being driven by culture. Right? And they didn't really want to have anything to do with him. So he goes back over to zoology and he tells the professors there this, and their response was just as disillusioning to him. Their response was, don't worry about what they say over in anthropology. What they're doing over there is as close to science as poetry is. So don't worry about it. But he stuck it through, And he finished up his undergraduate degree in Cambridge. And then he went on to do his PhD on the evolution of altruism. And it's a bizarre story, but he actually was able to do it at 2 different places. One of those 2 places was, surprisingly enough, the London School of Economics. This is important because at the London School of Economics, he learned how to do cost-benefit analysis, the kind that's critical to any kind of economic approach towards micro or macroeconomics. But he then took that cost-benefit approach that he learned and he applied it to the question of the evolution of altruism. And in his PhD work, he developed a full-blown mathematical model to explain the evolution of altruism via genetic relatedness, via kinship. And he did this in 2 different ways. You can thank me because I'm not going to spend any time on the 60-page version that came out of that had 100 different equations in it. Instead, I'm going to focus on a little 3-page paper that he did where he summarized the idea and boiled it down to the kernel of what was going on. The idea that he developed was called inclusive fitness theory. And it was called inclusive fitness because typically when you think about fitness from an evolutionary biology perspective, you think about the number of offspring that an individual produces. This was going to be inclusive fitness because when you help your altruists, you aren't just helping when you help your genetic relatives, you aren't just helping your offspring, you might be helping your cousins or your brothers or your sisters, so it's a kind of more inclusive view of fitness. And in Hamilton's model, you only need to keep track of 3 things to understand the evolution of altruism. The first one is, how genetically related are individuals? In essence, what you want to do is you want to build a family tree of whatever species, of whatever population of organisms you're looking at. You want to know the family history of those individuals. Today, we can do a lot of that using molecular genetics, and the DNA fingerprinting you might hear about in criminal cases can also be used to determine genetic relatedness among animals as well. And so you and your siblings are genetic relatives, and you and your cousins are genetic relatives, right? But you're more closely related to your siblings than you are to your cousins because essentially you both share 2 parents, whereas you and your cousins have to go back 1 further generation to talk about the individuals the relatives you share. So you're more closely related to your siblings than you are your cousins. You can measure genetic relatedness in any species as long as you know things like, okay, so who's having the babies? And then how are the young interacting with each other? Are they interacting with their siblings? Are they interacting with their cousins? Are they interacting with strangers? And so on. You can measure genetic relatedness in a population. That's one of the things you need to do in Hamilton's theory. One of the other things is you need to know just how costly the altruistic act is. So far, we've been talking very generally, like, well, it has to be costly. Well, as a scientist, we want to be more specific than that. How costly is it? So let's just return to those Belding's ground squirrels that give the alarm calls. What we want to know is something like, if you give the alarm call, are you 10 times more likely to be taken by the predator than someone who doesn't? Or are you maybe just 10% more likely to be taken by a predator? Or maybe you're only 1% more likely, or maybe you're 100 times more. You can measure those sort of things. If you're out in the field and you study these Belding's ground squirrels for long enough, you can start estimating based on what you see, who's getting taken by the predators, just how costly it is to be altruistic versus not to be. So you need to measure the cost of the altruistic behavior. And then the last thing you need to do is measure the benefit to others who you help when you're altruistic. Again, let's go back to our Belding's ground squirrels. The individuals that are being helped are the ones that are heading for safety right away. Now, the question here is, how great is the benefit, right, of having an altruist warn you? So, for example, what's your probability of surviving if your group has lots of altruists versus if the group you live in has no altruists? Are you way more likely to survive? Are you only just a little bit more likely to survive? Right? What's the benefit that you get if an altruist helps you. And what Hamilton says is, if you know these three things, how closely related are individuals? How costly is it to be altruistic? And how much does it help the recipient? Then you can predict when altruism is going to evolve via genetic relatedness. And to do this, Hamilton had a really, really simple equation that we're going to walk through. Hamilton says altruism evolves whenever the genetic relatedness between the altruist and the individual that it helps, multiplied by how much the recipient is helped. If that's greater than the cost of being altruistic, then altruism evolves. So let's kind of parse this and understand why that's so. For any trait to evolve by natural selection, somehow or another, the cost associated with that trait has to be made up somehow or another. It has to be compensated somehow or another. In Hamilton's little equation here, the way that it's compensated is the indirect kickback that you get by helping your genetic relatives. Remember, your genetic relatives are likely to have the same genes you are. So you're getting this indirect kickback by helping them because you're helping copies of your genes. They just happen to reside in your sibling or your mother or your child. How much is the indirect kickback? It's determined by how related you are and how much you help the other individual. So if that genetic relatedness times benefit to other, the kickback is greater than the cost, then altruism evolves. It's really remarkable that you could have an equation this simple that makes predictions about when altruism is going to evolve. This little equation is known as Hamilton's rule. We can make some very powerful predictions from this tiny little equation. Right? Altruism is more likely to evolve when anything on the left-hand side is greater. So altruism is more likely to evolve when genetic relatedness is high. If you're helping very close genetic relatives, they're more likely to have the same copies of genes you do. That means you're more likely to have this side be greater than that side. If the benefit to others is high, if when you're helped a lot, then again, that makes this side of the equation higher. That means altruism is more likely to evolve. That's a second prediction. The third prediction is altruism is less likely to evolve when the cost of altruism is high. So if this is high, altruism is expected to evolve more likely. You get more likely to get altruism. If this is high, you're more likely to get the evolution of altruism. And if this is high, you're less likely to get the evolution of altruism. But in fact, this little equation is even more powerful and allows us to make other predictions. And so all I'm going to do now is I'm going to put up that equation, and it's going to have one symbol in there that I'll define in a second. Here's genetic relatedness, benefit to others, and cost of altruism. This little epsilon sign means that you add it up over every one of the genetic relatives you help. So think about our ground squirrels. When you give an alarm call, you're not just helping one ground squirrel in your group. You might be helping 10 ground squirrels or 5 ground squirrels. You might be helping 5 genetic relatives. Well, for every genetic relative you help, you get this indirect kickback, genetic relatedness times benefit to others. If you help one relative, then you don't need this little sign here. It's just what we said before. But if you help 2 relatives, you get the genetic relatedness times the benefit for relative 1 and then for relative 2. If you help 10 genetic relatives with the same act of altruism, then you add it up for all 10. What that means is the more genetic relatives you help, the more likely altruism is to evolve. And just from this little equation, then we have these whole set of predictions about when altruism is more likely to evolve via genetic relatedness. And there have been multiple hundreds of studies specifically looking and testing all of these predictions. And there are probably thousands of studies in the literature that have been done where they haven't specifically been designed to test this, but you can actually test the model anyway because they have the data in them. So this is something that's been studied a great deal. And generally speaking, this equation, Hamilton's rule, is really powerful for explaining the evolution of altruism. When this is high, altruism is more likely to evolve. When this is, it's more likely to evolve. When this is high, it's less likely to evolve. The more relatives you help, the more likely it is to evolve. Lots and lots of data suggest that. Last time we're going to talk about the ground squirrels because we can summarize what's been done on them for the evolution of altruism really, really nicely in this little graph that comes from one of the papers that came out of this. So over here, we have the first squirrel giving an alarm call, in this case to a mammal, but the same predatory mammal, the same general thing holds true if it's a bird, like a hawk or something. So now what you're looking at with these blue bars, this is just sort of a breakdown of what a normal ground squirrel group is made up of. So adult females make up about 30%. So here's 0, here's 30. About 30% of the individuals in an average group are adult females. About 20% are adult males. Right? And we're going to focus on the adult females and the adult males. But you can also see, how many 1-year-olds, what percentage of the population is 1-year-olds and juveniles and so on. But we want to focus on these two. So adult females make up 30% of the average group, and adult males make up 20% of the average group. Now, let's map onto this who's giving the alarm calls. And what you can see is that close to 70% of the alarm calls are given by females. Even though only 30% of the individuals in the group, on average, are female, the vast majority of alarm calls are given by females. And then look at these rotten, stinking adult males. They make up 20% of a group, and they're almost never giving alarm calls. All right, so one thing that comes out of this is there's a sex difference. Females are much more likely to give alarm calls than males. But that doesn't tell us anything about the kinship aspect. To understand that, you need to know one more bit about life as a Belding's ground squirrel. And that is that when individuals become adults or sexually mature, when females become sexually mature, they stay in the same group they were born in. When males become sexually mature, they go off and find mates in other groups. Now, what that does is it creates this giant difference in genetic relatedness between the average female and the average male. So think about the average adult female. What genetic relatives is she going to have around her? Well, she's going to have her kids, fine. But she's also going to have her sisters, because they're going to stay, because that's what sexually mature females do. She's going to have her female cousins. She might have her mother. Unlikely, but she might have her grandmother. So she's basically ensconced in a world of genetic relatives. Now, our sexually mature males, they go off and they mate somewhere else. The only genetic relatives they're going to have are their pups. So the average genetic relatedness among females is way higher. Who are the ones who are being altruistic? The ones that are more genetically related, in this case, females. We also have sort of a second type of evidence that genetic relatedness is the key thing here. And that is that, so this is based on decades of data. There's anecdotal data that also suggests how important genetic relatedness is. So I've been saying so far, right, that the key is that being surrounded by your genetic relatives, that's what makes altruism so common in females, but not so much in males. Every once in a while, there is a natural disaster that will hit around where the Belding's ground squirrels live. It might be a flood that floods out, the tunnels underground, or it might be something else. And when a natural disaster comes and sort of wipes out the area where the squirrels live, then everybody has to migrate into different groups. And when everybody migrates into different groups, then adult sexually mature females are also now finding themselves not surrounded by their genetic relatives the way they were before, but more like surrounded the way that a normal adult male would be surrounded. When that happens, they dramatically reduce the number of these altruistic alarm calls they give. We know that they can use smell to assess genetic relatedness from other studies. When they sense that they're not surrounded by their genetic relatives, they dramatically drop their level of altruism. Now, perhaps the group that's been studied most in terms of looking at Hamilton's theory, remember I called it inclusive fitness theory before, are social insects like ants, bees, and wasps. And I want to tell you about some work there, but let's just start off with some basics, right? So why might you look to this group to study the evolution of altruism? Well, one of the predictions we made was the more genetic relatives you can help, the more likely altruism is to evolve. So these workers who go out and defend the hive might be saving the life of hundreds of relatives. Most importantly, though, they might be saving the life of the queen, who is the baby-making machine, the one that's pumping out all of these genetic relatives. So they're a great case for looking at, because altruism is very likely to help lots and lots of genetic relatives. The vast majority of offspring produced in, for example, your typical bee or ant or wasp nest/colony is produced by the queen, the vast majority. But these social insects, as they're known, have this sort of funky thing going on about the way they reproduce. Females are produced from fertilized eggs. So when the queen mates with a drone, that's just a name for a male bee, when she mates with a drone and her egg and his sperm unite, the result is a female. But the queen can also produce offspring from unfertilized eggs, where this egg isn't being fertilized by a sperm. That egg can develop into a perfectly good offspring, but it's always a male. So if it's the product of a fertilized egg and sperm, then it's a female. If it's just an unfertilized egg that hasn't been joined with sperm, then it's always a male. So let's keep that in mind as we go along. That's the funky thing, one of the funky things that's going on. So these queens, they can produce females this way, or they can produce male offspring this way. Now, the queen produces most of the offspring, but on occasion, female workers also produce offspring, someone who's not the queen. So the queen is, typically much, much bigger than females, other females in the nest, and she basically sits there and pumps out eggs, and everybody does everything for her. Female workers can also produce offspring, but no drone, no male will have anything to do with them. They will only mate with the queen. What that means is that these female workers can only produce unfertilized eggs. No male will mate with them, no sperm. All the eggs that are produced by anybody but the queen, they're all male. All of this is going to become important when we start looking at what this translates into in terms of altruism. So I said they have this really strange genetic architecture where they can produce females from fertilized eggs and males from unfertilized eggs. So males, they come from these unfertilized eggs, and what that means is they are what's known in biology as haploid. All that means is instead of having 2 copies of every chromosome, one from the queen and one from their father, they have 1 copy of every chromosome because they come from an unfertilized egg. There is no sperm fertilizing that egg. They only have 1 copy of everything. Females come from fertilized eggs. They are what's known as, this should say diploid. They have 2 copies of each chromosome, just like we do. We have 2 copies of every chromosome, one from mom, one for dad. So do they, so do females, but males only have 1 copy. What this does is it means that full sisters in these kind of social insects that are called haplodiploid because of producing haploid males and diploid females, full sisters have a genetic relatedness that's 50% higher than full sisters in a mammalian species like ourselves. So you have a high genetic relatedness to your sister, but because of this strange genetic system, sisters, bee sisters and ant sisters and wasp sisters, are 50% more genetically related to their sister than you are to yours, or any mammal is to their sister. That's why when you look at altruism and you look at who's going out and stinging and defending the hive, it's the females, because they are the ones that have really high genetic relatedness within the hive, way higher than the average male has in terms of genetic relatedness in the hive. Again, high genetic relatedness, lots and lots of altruism. And it's not just stinging intruders. The honeybee nest is this incredibly efficient system where they're cleaning out the cells where the eggs are going to be, and they're removing dead things, and they're bringing in food, and they're taking care of the queen and grooming her. Every single decent act undertaken in a honeybee or an ant or a wasp nest is undertaken by females. Males do nothing. All they do is try and mate with the queen. All right. Now, here's an interesting way that people have studied altruism and genetic relatedness in species like bees, ants, and wasps. There is this very strange behavior that goes on in these groups called policing behavior. I'm going to show you policing behavior in just a minute. But to set it up, what I need to tell you is a little something about genetic relatedness. It's really costly if you're a worker in the hive to help raise up the eggs into pupae and into independent organisms so they can leave the hive. It's really costly to do that, to help like that. Okay? Under most conditions, female workers are more related to the male offspring of the queen than they are to the male offspring of any other worker who might cheat and produce their own offspring. And they'll only produce males. So I'm going to call them cheating sisters. Cheating in the sense that the typical thing is for the queen to mate, to produce offspring. But there are these workers who will do it. Now, because of the funky genetic architecture, again, female workers are going to be more related to the male offspring of the queen than to the male offspring of any of their cheating sisters. And the reason I'm focusing on male offspring is because that's the only kind of offspring that the cheating sister can produce. And so we need to kind of compare apples and apples. So if I pick females, only the queen can do that, and we can't make the kind of comparison I want to make. What this means is natural selection should favor workers who basically destroy the male eggs of their cheating sisters. Why? Because they're more related to the male eggs of the queen, and it takes energy and time to raise up males, and what you should be doing is using that energy and time to raise up those males that are more closely related to you. So you should get rid of those males that are produced by the cheating sisters. And getting rid of them is what's known as policing behavior. So here what you have is a honeybee hive, and here's a female worker going in and basically eating the male egg that one of her cheating sisters has produced. So she gets rid of it, but in addition, she actually gets a meal out of it. Okay? This sort of thing also happens in wasps. I'm sorry, this picture is very, very fuzzy. All I wanted to show you is that this is kind of happening inside the nest for honeybees, but most species of wasps, it's happening on the outside of the nest, and the wasps are doing the same thing. Female workers are going around knocking off the male offspring of their sisters because those male offspring aren't as related to them as male offspring of the queen. And in fact, you can look at this experimentally. So this is dealing with honeybees. And we want to, again, compare apples and apples. So we're going to compare male eggs that the queen laid versus male eggs that workers laid. And we're tracking this over basically 24 hours. And here's the percent of eggs that were remaining. So at the start, all the eggs are there. And what you can see is within about 8 hours, there's virtually no male eggs that have been produced by the cheating sisters. It's still not 100% clear, but we think that there are sort of chemical odors that the workers can use to distinguish the eggs laid by their cheating sisters and by the queen. Now look at what happens with the queen-laid eggs. Yes, you get mortality along the way, but at the end of those 24 hours, you still have, 55% of the eggs. So yeah, things die. Lots of these eggs die just for all sorts of reasons. This is just natural mortality. This is not workers going around knocking off these eggs. This is the workers going around knocking off the eggs. Genetic relatedness explains it. You are doing this because you want to invest in individuals who are more genetically related to you. Those are the male eggs of the queen rather than the male eggs of the cheating sisters. So the first work was done in these honeybees, and then people began to kind of think, okay, there are other ways and other things that we can do to study this policing behavior and genetic relatedness. We can extend the logic. And here is what they thought. The more effective policing was at getting rid of the eggs of these cheating sisters, the more efficient that workers were at doing that, the less often you should see these cheating sisters try and cheat. Because if everything that you produce as a cheating sister is just going to be eaten, then even from your perspective, it's not worth the time. You could help raise the queen's eggs. So to test this, they looked at how effective policing behavior was and how often cheating sisters try to cheat, or how often cheating sisters were doing their thing. And they did this in 9 different species. I'll just kind of orient you. Apis mellifera, that's the honeybee. And Polistes here, anything you see Polistes, everything else here of Polistes, Vespa, and the other species, these are all wasps. And what you can see is this nice negative relationship. The more effective policing is, the less often cheating sisters try to cheat. If, like in the honeybee, in some cases you can have 98% efficiency, meaning that 98% of the cheating workers' eggs are eaten and killed, then you see relatively little attempts to cheat. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, this Polistes wasp species, the effectiveness of policing is really nothing like it is over here, maybe 30, maybe 40% of the eggs. So that means the majority of the eggs of the cheating sisters are surviving. All of a sudden, it becomes more worth being a cheating sister. And what you see is cheating sister percentages shoots up to 35%. Again, genetic relatedness explains what's going on here. All right, so just give me one moment here. I'm trying to think what I want to do. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. And there's more to say about inclusive fitness, but what I'm going to do is actually switch, give me one moment to switch my slide set because I need a different set of slides for this. And what I want to do now is I want to go beyond the evolution of altruism and the evolution of these kind of cooperative, pro-social behaviors, and look at something that's even sort of more pro-social, and look at the evolution of that. So we've looked at altruism. We see that kinship can help explain it. Another way, and that we didn't have time to do, unfortunately, that you can get the evolution of altruism is reciprocity. If you and I exchange acts of goodness to each other, you can also get the evolution of reciprocity, because the cost that I pay is made up when you help me. And there are other theories for how you get altruism. But here I want to take it a step further and see if we can explain even more complex pro-social behavior. And to do that, I'm going to look at 2 cases. The first one is the evolution of empathy. So there are lots of different definitions of empathy. Generally speaking, when we talk about empathy, we mean that an individual can put themselves in the position of another and feel what that individual is feeling. So if you express empathy to someone who is in a burning building and you go in and save them, it's because you can put yourself in the perspective of what it's actually like to be in a burning building and crying for help. And for a long time, animal behavior has stayed away from trying to explain empathy and even study it, because it's just so darn complicated. It involves so much. The idea of perspective taking is such a hard thing to try and experimentally look at that people shied away from it. And then, within the last decade or two, folks decided, let's see if we can look at empathy in non-humans and take an evolutionary perspective on it. Because if we can study it in lots of non-humans, then maybe we can understand it more fundamentally, so we can understand the evolution of empathy, but it might also help us understand human empathy. And so people began working, and they started in what might surprise you, a system that might surprise you, and that is they studied empathy in rats.
My name is Peggy Mason.
Hang on. I know, Peggy. Hold on one second. Here's the system that they devised. How can you study this notion that an animal can put themselves into the position of another, and if that other is feeling distress, go and do something pro-social for it, help it? How do you do that? So what they did was they had pairs of rats, so dozens of pairs of rats, and each pair, the individuals would live with each other for a couple of weeks just to get to know each other in the same cage. And they were the same sex, so there was no monkey business going on. It was just getting to know each other. All right, so after those couple of weeks, what she does, what the researcher Peggy Mason, you'll see a video in 1 second, what she does is for any pair, what she'll do is she'll flip a coin and she'll determine that there is going to be one individual that we're going to gather data on and another individual who they might be able to help. And so what she does is she takes one individual and she puts them in a little canister that's slightly bigger than a rat, and she closes the door. And if you're a rat, you don't like this. There's barely enough room to move around. They're not in pain or anything, and they're in this device with this wonderful name that literally you can go order it online. It's called a universal rodent restrainer. And they're in there, and Peggy Mason closes the door, okay? And the rat in there doesn't like it. Now, the door, in fact, can be opened, but it can only be opened from the outside. You cannot open it if you're the rat trapped in there. So into this arena where she has this canister and a trap rat, she introduces that rat's partner who they've been living with for weeks. And what she wants to know is, will that partner attempt to free the trapped rat? We know that the trapped rat is giving off ultrasonic distress calls, because you can measure them. A student in my lab did follow-up work on this. You can measure the ultrasonic, we can't hear them, but you can get microphones where you can measure these ultrasonic distress calls. So the trap rat is giving off these ultrasonic distress calls, clearly in trouble. The free rat doesn't have to do anything. It could just kind of move around in this arena. It doesn't have to do anything. And so let's see what it... No, not in this experiment, no. Okay, that's why well, let me play the video for you, okay? Oh, let's go back and...
My name is Peggy Mason. I'm a professor of neurobiology at the University of Chicago, and I'm really excited to share with you the results of a collaboration with Jean Dissetti and Inbal Bartal, where we looked at empathy and helping behavior in rats. We've known for some time that rats show the simplest form of empathy.
I have to get to the point. Here we go, here we go, here we go.
So we put a free rat, the rat with the black dot on his head, into an arena, and in the center is his cage mate trapped in a plexiglass restrainer.
Okay.
The door to the restrainer can only be opened from the outside by the free rat. Here you're seeing the first 5 minutes sped up on the first day of testing.
So no training.
Even though it takes quite a bit of rat courage to venture into the scary arena center.
They like to stay on the
free rat
sides.
persists in moving to the center and trying to figure this restrainer thing out so he can help his cage mate.
Maybe.
So now in this clip, the rats have been in this paradigm several times. This is the 5th day of testing. And we're viewing the session in real time, but after 25 minutes have elapsed. What you see is that the free rat is very focused on the door. You will see him open the door for the first time in a moment. What I want you to notice is that the free rat freezes. He freezes because the door falls over. And since it's the first time he's opened the door, he's surprised and he startles by freezing at the sound of the falling door. There he goes. Now, after a brief exploration of the strange land of the restrainer, the liberated rat runs around exploring the arena. Wherever the liberated rat goes, the free rat follows, jumping on and licking him. For about 5 to 10 minutes, this apparent celebration continues, with the free rat very active and always in close proximity to his liberated cage mate.
Okay, now, it sure looks like empathy. There's this trap rat giving off distress calls. There's a free rat, doesn't have to do anything. Eventually, it figures out it doesn't know how to open the door. It seems to be, so when she said it takes courage to go into the center, rats have, I can't remember the technical word for it, but basically they love to sort of have something on their side, so they like to be up against the walls. They don't like to go into open areas. But this other rat is doing it, and it's trying, it seems, to open the door, and finally it does. So just a couple of other follow-ups to that. Then they would run this experiment for many, many more days. And once that free rat had learned how to open the door, the next time you put them in there, they opened the door very quickly. And they did that over and over again. Now, this seems like empathy, right? But this is the sort of experiment on its own that gives people who study animal behavior and evolution nightmares, because there are so many other things that might explain what's going on here besides empathy. So what Peggy Mason and her colleagues did was a series of follow-up control experiments to look at other possible alternatives. So maybe the free rat, maybe rats just like something to do. They're bored. That free rat is bored. Trying to figure out how to open the door, it's something. They like to be engaged in things. They like to play. They like to do that sort of thing. Maybe they just like to open doors. No. If you run the exact same experiment with the free rat out there, but there's nobody in there, they don't do it. And in fact, if you put like a plush, very realistic looking rat in there that isn't obviously giving off distress calls, again, they don't do it. So that's what I just said with a toy rat. Now, here's another possibility. Let me see, right. Okay, yeah, let me just go back. We know that rats, honest, like to play with each other. Lots and lots of work on this. Rodents like to play with each other. Mammals like to play with each other. Rats are no exception. So maybe the free rat isn't being empathetic at all. He couldn't give a hoot that the other rat is in trouble. All he wants, or she wants, is someone to play with. And the only way to get that is to open the door. So Peggy Mason and her team had to figure out a way to look at that. So as I say, once the free rat learns this, if you put them together the next day, they'll do it right away. They'll open the door. And the researchers will do this for like many, many days afterwards. So in one set of experiments, what they did was this. As soon as the free rat opened the door, and the trap rat is now able to go around, do whatever it wants, this hand comes over the top of the arena and takes out that formerly trapped rat. Rats are smart. They learn very, very quickly. The free rat learns after a couple of times that every time it opens the door, this other rat's going to get out, but it's not going to be able to play with it. It's gone. Some strange thing is happening, and it's just something, and it's not there anymore. Nevertheless, they keep opening the door day after day after day, which is what you would do if you were empathetic, but not if you just wanted a play partner. And then finally, well, they ran a bunch of other things, but maybe one of my favorites was this. So they wanted to somehow gauge how much it meant to the free rat to display this empathy and to allow the trap rat to get out, was that something that was really important to the free rat or not? I mean, was it just trivially important? Or if it could do something else, it would do it. So what they did was they ran the same scenario that you're looking at here, except there would be a second universal rat restrainer next to this one with a door that can only be opened from the outside. But in that second one, they put chocolate chips. And rats love chocolate chips. They will do anything for chocolate chips, all right? So what they asked was, well, okay, now we're going to put the free rat in here, and we have the rat in one of the restrainers and chocolate in the other. What happens, right? Does the free rat do what a respectable selfish rat would do, which would be open up the door to the chocolate, eat it all, and then maybe let out the other rat? Or what does it do? Over and over again, what they did was the free rat would open the door, free its partner, and then it would open the other door, and they would both eat the chocolate. Then doesn't that make you feel much better about rats than you used to? There have been other experiments done on empathy in other species that follow this up, because this was kind of a landmark study on empathy in non-humans. We don't really have time to get into that, and I really want to make sure to give you guys a chance to ask questions. And so even though there's more that we could talk about, and you will be able to look at on the slides when they're posted online, I think I'm going to stop here, and I will take as many questions as you have. Yeah. Okay.
So in species like where they have to die to reproduce, like salmon or octopuses, like, is that a form of altruism, or is that just sort of like what needs to be done to reproduce?
It's a very good question, and literally this place that I stopped on the other slides and switched over to empathy was on something related to that. The answer is that in and of itself, a species that dies, has one bout of reproduction and dies, in and of itself, that's not altruistic. But there are instances in which you can have altruism being expressed in the form of dying after reproduction, but just the act of dying after reproduction isn't in and of itself altruism, but there are systems in which altruism can be expressed there. And the only way I could do it would be to show you the slides, and if we have time, maybe we can do that, but let's not for right now, because I want to make sure I give everybody a chance.
Is this decision-making thought out, or is this instinctive, or?
Is the decision, right, is the decision-making thought out or instinctive? Well, the first thing I would say is those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So you can have instinctive behaviors that require you to do some sophisticated level of assessment in order to play them out. So I don't think it's that dichotomy is really a real one. In terms of knowing what's going on inside the animals' heads when they're doing this, that is, up until very recently, I would say that has been something that people haven't looked at because we just don't have the tools. We don't know how to do that. And so essentially, our assumption is they act as if they are going through these complex cognitive processes. Now, I will say, though, that there is more and more work being done where animals, I don't think this has been done on things like rats, but it's been done on dogs, and it's been done on other primate species, where other animals can be put into fMRI and brain scan devices. It's not easy. They don't like being put in there any more than we do. In fact, they like it a lot less. But it can be done. You can train them. And what that does is it at least gives you a window. Because what you can do is, there are gazillion studies of brain scans of humans, and we know what different areas of the brain sort of light up when we're involved in pleasure versus pain versus lots of other things. If we can look at the similar parts of the brains in species like dogs and chimpanzees to see if they are, in fact, when they're put in a situation, so you can actually put them in these things and then have them make decisions that are altruistic or not, and you can look at what areas of their brain light up. If it's the same area of the brain that lights up when we do it, then maybe we think we know what area of the brain is involved. It doesn't mean it absolutely tells us that. It might not be that, but if they display sort of similar brain activity to the brain activity that we express when we're, for example, feeling pleasure, then we assume that they're feeling pleasure. May not be right, but so far it's the best we can do. Yes?
I was wondering if I am understanding this correctly. In the experiment of the free rat and the trapped rat, the trap itself, is that something that the free rat can look inside and see?
Oh, yes, it's clear. It can see everything that's going on there as well as here.
So if in that experiment, the free rat can be attracted by the noises that the trapped rat makes, or it could be attracted to the fact that when he looks into the trap, he can see somebody there. When the hand comes over and just takes the rat out, the trapped rat out, then there's nothing in the trap and there's no noises in the trap. So why?
Sorry. So maybe I might not have explained that right. What I was saying was not, so the hand doesn't come in and open the door and free the rat. What the hand does is once the free rat has opened the door and the other rat goes out, then the hand comes in and takes it, right?
I understand that part. So after the hand comes in and takes what was once the trapped rat out, the free rat continues to try and open the door.
No, it's open. Once he opens the door, that's it.
Oh, he doesn't do it again and again.
He will the next day, but once they open the door, it falls on the floor and it doesn't get put back right away. It's not until the next time they're together the next day.
So the only reason to open the door is if he sees somebody in the trap or if he hears the noise.
Yeah. So far I should know this. I don't think people have separated those two things. In other words, in principle, so it can see and it can hear these ultrasonic calls, right? But in principle, we don't know how much it's relying on seeing and kind of feeling and other things versus hearing that ultrasonic distress call. But we could play the ultrasonic distress call from inside the canister when there's nobody else in there. And if that was alone was just getting them to respond by opening the door, then we would know how important that is. But I don't believe anybody's done that.
So we're at work.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go to the back and then I'll come up here. Yeah.
If you slow this down and do it from a complexity with either a quantitative or qualitative orientation, would you see the mind emerge that is responsive of the unconscious, conscious, and even explore the biochemistry of the socio-technical system at play?
So no one's doing that in this system because it's just still at this point too complex. But people are doing that in honeybees, where we basically know everything about all the genes that honeybees have and what they do and how what kind of chemicals they express. So in that system, people are trying to get down to the biochemistry of social behavior. Here, no, not yet. Yeah, but yeah, go.
So do they ever, the free rat basically has learned to open the door.
Right.
So do they ever switch and make the free rat the trapped rat and to see what happens then?
No, but it's something you could do. It's a good. It's something you would expect people will eventually do. And you might ask questions like, if you've been trapped and you have a partner. So not every free rat does this, but statistically speaking, many of them do. So you could ask questions like, well, if paired with this other rat and it never opens the door for you, versus if it does open the door for you, how likely are you to do it? Absolutely, you could do that kind of experiment. No one's done it yet, but you could, yeah.
So those behaviors that end up in death, perishing, sacrificing the individual, could they be some sort of ancient evolutionary trait of population control?
Okay, so the question is, could this be those behaviors that involve ultimately sacrificing yourself, in this case to help others, could this be a form of population control? There are two things. First of all, that kind of hyper-altruistic behavior, like what the bees do, is extremely rare. Okay, so most forms of altruism are not giving up your life in order to help others. It might be increasing the probability that you're going to be killed, but it doesn't. But not that you will be killed. And if you are a worker bee and you do that, you will die. So it's rare to have sort of that that hyper altruism where you always give up your life when you display altruism. The question about whether behaviors like that could ever be some sort of population control. So I was steeped in debates on this for 30 years, and all I can tell you is that most evolutionary biologists would argue on theory, based on theory and based on empirical evidence, no, that's not what happens, that you can always explain it from an individual perspective. And oh, they've thought about it, yes. Yes, I guarantee you they've thought about it. So okay, I know we have a couple more questions, but okay, let me do this. It's 10 to 8. So let me take these two questions, and then I have one more video on something, and I really think you're going to want to see this. So let me take these two questions, and then I'll do that last one. Yes?
Has anybody been interested in doing a children's experiment with adults to see how much altruism we have lost as we grow up?
Oh, so, yeah. So there are up-teen experiments on altruism in humans. Many, literally thousands of experiments on altruism in humans. And I have no doubt that some of them may actually track the same individuals over time, but I don't know the results of those experiments. But there are endless experiments where social psychologists will put people in a room and they'll have them play these games that have been developed to test your tendency to be altruistic or not. I would not be surprised if some of these works have done, or like longitudinal, they track the same individual over different ages. I just don't know that literature well enough to answer what they found. I don't know.
You know, the free rat knows the benefit of free indication, the trapped rat. Does the worker bee know they're going to die if they sting?
The best thing I can tell you is there's no way for us to know the answer to that. I mean, so I would say that I would say, as a default, there's no reason to think. So does it know it? Meaning, does it experience it the way we would? Is that what you mean by no? So this is where it gets real. Okay, what do you?
You had said something about like the benefit analysis or whatever.
So the cost-benefit analysis assumes nothing about that. Does not assume that they know or that they don't know. All that it does is it asks, do they do it or don't they do it?
Same thing with the squirrel. The squirrel.
Absolutely.
Not the call. Does he know he's in danger when he's doing that?
That's right. We don't know what is going on inside their brains. We don't know the answer, but why don't I know it? Yeah, it's a good. Again, it's because it's been so hard to get at that. So I know people now who work in fish systems where they study altruism, and you can actually do things like, if the fish is big enough, you can actually have these tiny little micro pumps that will pump in different hormones into their brains and into their bodies to look at how that affects whether they're altruistic. You can measure brain waves in primates that you've put these things on. So there are ways that we can tell you at least what's going on mechanistically, like what part of their brain, what hormone is important, whether they know something. This is the stuff of philosophy. I mean, whether you know something or I know something is also the stuff of philosophy.
The difference between instinct and thought.
Another question that is just something that I don't like answering. We just can't possibly get into that in 5 minutes, but we can't. But we can do something in 5 minutes that I think you'll really just enjoy having stayed for. So I want to, and really will take that long. So I want to now extend past altruism and cooperation, past empathy, and look at morality and the evolution of morality and justice in non-humans. And in particular, whether there exists a sense of injustice and how to respond to it. What I mean by injustice in the context of what we're going to talk about is this. If you and I have the same job, but I get paid more than you do, and we both do the job equally well, that's unjust. It's unjust that, on average, women still make less for the same job than men do. We respond to that injustice. It infuriates us. The question is, that we're going to look at, is do we have any evidence that animals are capable of that kind of response? Okay? Now, to do this, now some of you may have actually seen this video. It's quite popular, but I'm guessing most of you haven't. All right, so these are capuchin monkeys, and here's a capuchin, here's a capuchin, here's a little fence. They can reach through it, so they can see and touch. Here's an investigator. Her name is Sarah. She works with a primatologist, Franz de Waal, who just recently died. Who was one of the leading people studying primate behavior. And she's going to do, they're doing this experiment on the response to injustice, okay? And so here's the deal, and here's what you need to keep in mind when you watch this video. What Sarah has done is that she has trained the capuchins to know that if they pick up a little stone in here, and they hand it to Sarah, they'll get a piece of food. Now, in and of itself, that's fascinating. It's a simple barter system, and the monkeys can learn it, but that's not the key here. There are two kinds of food that Sarah has sitting over here. You can only see one of them, cucumbers. Over here, there's a little bowl with grapes. All you have to remember while you watch this video is grapes are better than cucumbers, okay? They want grapes, they want the sugar, they will eat the cucumber if you give it to them, but if you give them any kind of choice, they will always take grapes. Grapes are better than cucumbers. Now, watch what happens, and you're going to hear Franz's voice in the background.
The monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens.
Okay.
So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us.
Okay.
And that's what she does.
Okay.
And she gets a grape.
A grape.
She eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
Okay. Okay. So, and it keeps, okay, and this is just the same thing over again. Okay. Now it's a great video. I laughed. I mean, I've seen it 100 times, and I still think it's a great video. But really, think about this, right? It was the same cucumber, and that cucumber was perfectly fine. If I give you a stone and I get a cucumber, that's fine. But if they give you a stone and they get a grape, what is that? That's unjust. That's unjust. So unjust that this monkey will throw back the food. Let me tell you something. There have been thousands of experiments using primates and food, and they never give up food that they will eat once they have it in their hands. This is an extreme response on these computers. And it wasn't just this pair over and over and over again. Now, Is that a response to injustice? This is one of the few experiments where people have asked that question. They ran controls. There's still debate. Some people think that maybe there are other explanations, but it's certainly very much in line with what we would expect if this, as a response to injustice, right? And it's not surprising that we see this sort of in our closest living relatives, other primates. And so I should really stop here. If you have other questions, you want to just come up here and talk. And next week is the last week of the course. We will spend the entire lecture on what's known as evolutionary or Darwinian medicine. So we're going to look at medicine from an evolutionary perspective, and I think in a way that will surprise you. Okay? So hopefully I'll see you then. Thank you.